Before Cruyff, there was nothing. Coming from the Netherlands, a country with basically no footballing history, Johan Cruyff hit the pro scene in 1964 for Ajax Amsterdam and was quickly one of the best in the world. But this story starts in earnest in 1970. In the world of football at the time, particularly in Europe, things threatened to become as lock and key shut down as they had ever been. Partially as a reaction to the stylish and offensive 4-2-4 that brought Brazil World Cup glory 3 times over, Italy brought the catenaccio, the chain, onto the world stage, a shut-down defensive style that took hold throughout the 60s. The general trend of footballing tactical history was a shift from a generally offensive focus, with things we would now deem ridiculous, like the pyramid, a 2-3-5 formation, to more defensive-oriented play. In the catenaccio, one might have feared that those chickens had come home to roost, that the future of the beautiful game would in fact be quite ugly. In the early 1970s, at the opening of a new decade, it was the perfect time for Rinus Michels and his player protege, Johan Cruyff, to come in and destroy pre-existing ideas of what football might look like. You've probably heard of what they came up with. Total football. A dreamlike system of positional interchange, no one player maintaining one position, rather being able to play any position and fill any role as it became vacant over the course of the game through the team's movement. It was the brainchild of Michels, the manager of the Dutch national team, and Cruyff was the player tasked with implementing it. It started at first with Ajax Amsterdam in 1970, and after it brought Ajax 3 straight European Cups, it would face its first international test in 1974, in the World Cup, in Germany. Against Uruguay, Johnny Rep, the most goal-scoring oriented man on the team, would announce himself with 2 goals and a clean win. On the other side of the pitch, another hero of total football, Rob Rensenbrink, held it down in defense, despite being a left wing by trade. They drew scoreless against Sweden, but it was the site of one of the World Cup's most famous moments ever. With this turn, Cruyff produced a move that would remain in the minds of footballers forever, one that still bears his name. Cruyff was the system, and the system was him. In this moment more than at any other. It was simple and effective, and above all, beautiful. In the final match of round 1, it was the Dutch against Bulgaria. Johannes Neeskens, the genius in midfield, scored from the spot in the 5th minute and again in the 44th, and the game was wrapped up by John Rep in the 71st minute with a lovely volley, as the game ended 4-1 as the Dutch coasted into the second round as winners of their group. In 1974, the World Cup looked a little different than it does today. Rather than the one group stage followed by 16-team knockout tournament format that we're used to, 1974 put the group winners and runners-up into 2 further groups of 4 teams each. The winner of these groups would play the final. First up, Argentina. It was here that these men played possibly the greatest total football match ever. The game started and it was already massively tilted in the Dutch favor, and in the 11th minute, Cruyff himself dribbled past the keeper and calmly placed it in the net. As a Spanish-language commentator put it as it rolled in, it couldn't have been from any other. The Dutch kept pushing forward, and Rudy Krol took the liberty of doubling the lead, benefiting from a fortuitous blunder on this shot. They would pile on 2 more, including a second from Cruyff, and would move on to the next game with a 4-0 victory in their pocket. This team, it had turned out, was quite different from the status quo. They had invented a new type of football and were using it to great effect, dismantling everyone in their path. Against the East Germans, there would be more challenge. These opponents played with a physical, negative style that was emblematic of the play that Cruyff and Michels designed their new philosophy to beat. Early on, the East Germans' Jürgen Pomeranka made a last-ditch goal line clearance for the GDR, but they failed to clear their lines, and the ball fell for Neeskens, who gave the Dutch the advantage. With both teams struggling on a rainy and wet pitch, the Dutch kept command of the game, despite some iron curtain tackles from the East Germans, including this knee-high studs-up number from Lothar Kurjevite that he somehow was not even booked for. However, the resulting free kick led to another dangerous run of play for the Dutch, and Rensenbrink got his first goal of the tournament, and that would see the Dutch through. They won 2-0. With a perfect record so far in the second round, one more opponent remained at that stage, the only other perfect team in the group. It would be a de facto semi-final against Brazil. These defending champs had won 3 of the last 4 tournaments and had several key pieces returned from 1970. Zé Maria in defense and Leal between the posts were joined by Marinho Chagas, the flashy left back, just 22 at the time, who would go on to become one of the greatest ever at the position. Jairzinho and Rivellino made up the famous duo at the heart of Brazil's attack. Due to their superior goal difference, the Dutch only needed a draw to go through to the final, and tested their defense against one of the world's most elegant sides. The Brazilians held the ball and pushed them, but in the 50th minute, the Dutch broke through, as a 1-2 from Cruyff and Neeskens sent the latter in on goal. In the 65th minute, the man himself, Cruyff, finished a cross with a stylish volley, and the Dutch would win 2-0 and stay top of their group. In the first real test of total football on the world stage, things could not have gone better. They had reached now the ultimate game, the pinnacle of football, the World Cup final. Their opponents that day, in Munich's Olympiastadion, happened to be the kings of the old world. Host nation West Germany were skilled in their own rights with big names like Breitner, Gerd Müller, and the iconic Beckenbauer. But they played stifling, crunching defensive football that ideologically countered Michels' free-flowing system. On the world's biggest sporting stage, it was a rigid German defense against total football, a battle of teams that was also a battle of footballing ideologies. Germany conceded a penalty within the first minute. The Dutch had possessed the ball for the opening seconds, and Cruyff's first burst of pace into the box was too much for the Germans to defend. Neeskens buried the penalty, and the Dutch already led 1-0. Both teams played on though, the Germans unfazed, putting in hard challenge after hard challenge. The Dutch kept trying to open up, but the Germans got the game they wanted. In the 25th minute, Wim Janssen's late challenge in the box sent Bernd Holstenbein to the floor. It was a penalty, more clear today than it might have been in 1974. Breitner scored to level the match. Then, as the game slid towards halftime, an innocuous-looking Dutch turnover ended up on the right side. A burst of pace, a tight cross, Müller on the end of it in the box, and it was in the back of the net. In the second half, the German defense came into its own, stifling total football. Cruyff and the Netherlands lost, and Germany won the World Cup. "1978 would be different. In a tournament in dictatorship Argentina, the Dutch had reloaded with new talent and a new coach. Cruyff, having retired from international football, wasn't there himself, but the ideas still were. Nevertheless, they came out in the first round supremely uninspiring. They took care of business 3-0 against Iran, then played a goalless draw against Peru. In the final match of round 1, they lost to Scotland, and were in danger of being eliminated altogether, until a Johnny Rep goal in the 71st minute ensured their safety amid a 3-2 loss, staying above the Scots on goal difference alone. To start the second round, they destroyed Austria 5-1, then drew against their foes from 1974, West Germany, 2-2, after overcoming the very 2-1 deficit that they couldn't equalize 4 years earlier. For the final match of round 2, it would once again be a de facto semi-final, this time against Italy. At the Monumental in Buenos Aires, Dutch hearts must have sunk when, trying to thwart Claudio Sala's one-on-one opportunity, Ernie Brandt's tackled the ball past his own keeper and netted an own goal. Even worse, the Italian side completely dominated the rest of the first half. The Dutch would have to be resilient, and they truly were. They still had no dominant hold on the game, no monopoly on possession, but when they had their chances, they took them as needed. The first came in the 51st minute, when Ernie Brandts took a strike from outside the box and sent it into the net to redeem his prior own goal. After weathering more chances, Ari Hahn had the ball far from the net. Hahn would go on to become a manager of many clubs after his playing career had finished, including some intriguing national teams in Albania, China, and Cameroon, but this moment will be what he is remembered for. Out of nowhere, Hahn hits at the ball, and it swerves past keeper Dino Zoff, hitting the post and then the net to deliver the Dutch a 2-1 lead, one they would never relinquish. From the win, they were once again finals bound. The opponents this time around were once again the hosts. Argentina, the country that the Dutch had defeated 4-0 4 years earlier, was back for more, this time with far more talent than before. Mario Kempes was the Albicelestes' most iconic and best player, a prime goalscorer, and he was backed up by René Hausemann and Daniel Pasarea, who would go on to become icons in their own rights. As the teams came out of the tunnel and into the sunlight at the Monumental, white ticker tape and streamers rained down on them, one of the most iconic football images ever. But, amid such sublime imagery, the game was cynical, a hostile home crowd looking for their nation's first ever World Cup as the match devolved. Out of a quick combination by the Albiceleste towards the end of the first half, Mario Kempes made a single touch that took him past 2 orange shirts, then shot the opener into the net. The Dutch would spend the next 45 minutes searching. They had chances, but few were good, and none went in. Then, in the 82nd minute with time winding down, Dick Naninga rose highest to meet a cross. His header was firm and direct, and it beat the keeper, and tied the World Cup final. As the World Cup final approached extra time, a free kick for the Dutch sliced through everyone, and Rensenbrink was the only one who could touch it. A true multi-positional icon, Rensenbrink had become a forward by this time in his career, and noted for his composure and cool finishing, and the elusiveness which earned him the nickname Snake Man. In the box, being contested by a defender and the keeper, reaching out, he smacked at the ball and it bounced through the ticker tape towards the Argentinian goal. For a second, it looked as if he had stolen the glory for the Dutch, but it was not to be. Those so many inches that denied the Dutch would be the closest they ever came. Kempes would score on a chaotic play in extra time, where the ball ricocheted after the keeper Youngblood got a touch to it, and left Kempes the last man to the net in the 105th minute. Another chaotic pinball play left Bertoni wide open to the goal in the 115th. That would be how the game ended. 3-1. 2 straight finals for the Dutch, and 2 losses. By all means, this team, these men, should have won a World Cup at some stage. Indeed, the two sides, and especially the 1974 squad, are remembered as among the best teams to not come home with the prize. This Dutch golden generation would never reach another World Cup final. They didn't even make the tournament in 1982 or 86, And in Italia 90, a renewed Dutch side faced bitter defeat in the round of 16, another infamous 2-1 loss to Germany. Still more was to go wrong, even beyond their absence from the 2 World Cups of the 80s. Total football failed to entirely revolutionize the footballing world, and by the 1990s, although the game was more open than the catenaccio or the West German tactics that won in 1974, there was still a defensive focus, something that dominated the 1990 World Cup. The Netherlands, though, rebounded through the 90s, and outside of a hiccup in 2002 where they missed the World Cup entirely, they were back on the world stage. In 2010, their new golden generation was ready to fight. These modern Dutch were led by a trio of modern legends. Robin van Persie, with an eye towards goal at all times, a constant threat, and Arjen Robben, a brilliant winger, with excellent pace and a killer left foot. The centerpiece of 2010 was Wesley Sneijder, a midfielder with plenty of goal-scoring ability of his own, as well as a genius level of creativity. Martin Stekelenburg held it down in goal, and he would have an outstanding tournament slotting into the role of the legendary Edwin van der Sar. Dirk Kuyt was also a key piece in the Dutch attack, and would contribute at numerous vital moments. All 5 of these men were youngsters on the 2006 team that were eliminated in the round of 16 in the infamous Battle of Nuremberg match that featured 4 red cards and 16 yellows against Portugal. And now, they were ready to leave their stamp on South Africa's World Cup 2010. They steamrolled through group play, winning all 3 matches, never once conceding from open play, the only goal they gave up being a penalty. After winning their group, they faced a 16-team knockout tournament, rather than the second round-robin group that the total footballers of the 70s dealt with. Against Slovakia in the round of 16, things got off to a quick start for them. Sneijder recovers in his own third, and without hesitation sends a long-range pass forward up the wing for Arjen Robben, who chases it down. Then Robben, 19th minute, does what he's best known for. He makes an inside cut, then buries a shot to the near post to establish the lead. In the 67th minute, it was time for Stekelenburg to announce his presence in earnest. Robert Vitek of Slovakia got in on goal and had just the keeper to beat, but his strike met the strong hand of the Dutch Ajax man instead of tying the match. In the 84th minute, Dirk Kuyt set up Sneijder for a second goal, and though Vitek broke the clean sheet with a penalty kick in the 94th minute, the Dutch would move on 2-1. Their next opponents were the arguable favorites. Brazil, football's eternal side, always a threat, were the quarterfinal matchup for the Dutch. While this game will be won by the Netherlands, and indeed this whole story is about them, this one match always seemed more about Brazil, something emblematic of their existence after their 2002 World Cup win. First, we see characteristic genius, as Felipe Melo finds the combination to unlock the Dutch defense and finds Robinho streaking in towards goal, seizing the advantage in just the 10th minute. Next, Kaká is only just denied by Stekelenburg with a glorious strike. The next major element of modern Brazil is some really bad defense. The Dutch were knocking on the door for a long time for their equalizer, but Wesley Sneijder's 53rd minute cross shouldn't have troubled them. Except, Felipe Melo interfered with his own keeper, and the ball skittered in to tie the match. 15 minutes later, it was bad to worse for Brazil. Finally, the third major theme of Brazil, the tendency to completely lose the plot. In the 73rd minute, Felipe Melo, the man who had sent Robinho in on goal, and the one who caused Sneijder's first, stamped on Arjen Robben's leg and got sent off. Brazil were left hopeless, and they crashed out at this stage, 2-1. If you look on Robinho's face after he scores in the 10th minute, you do see the joy there, but there's also a sense of relief. For the Seleção, the level of expectation for any World Cup is to win, no excuses for less. That idea has pushed them to be the most successful team in the World Cup's history, but at times it has seemed to weigh them down. Next on the schedule, upstart Uruguay. Without their star Luis Suarez, whose notorious handball in the quarterfinal against Ghana saw him suspended with a red card, the Dutch were expected to win, but it still needed to be done. In the 19th minute, Giovanni van Bronckhorst, the captain of this Dutch side, received the ball far from the net. Just like Ari Hahn in 1978, Van Bronckhorst produced one of the World Cup's greatest ever goals out of basically nothing. Among this team of stars, Van Bronckhorst was among the few starters to play in the relatively unprestigious Dutch domestic league. At age 35, he was playing in his last ever matches and would retire at the end of the tournament. Even so, this goal is what he is still remembered for. Uruguay would equalize, but Schneider and Robben each scored to secure the win, eventually advancing 3-2. This Netherlands side didn't play like their predecessors in the 70s, but this goal reminds us of those men. Total football certainly had its shortcomings, and Van Bronckhorst was definitely not the best player on this team, but both were capable, on their day, of making magic. For the Dutch in 2010, that goal helped put them one game away, for the third time in history. At this point, I have to admit to having buried the lead with this team. As they played through South Africa 2010, the Dutch came to be defined by the crunching sort of football that Cruyff had hoped to surpass. In particular, the infamous duo of Mark van Bommel and Nigel de Jong took no prisoners on defense. A joke went that this team had abandoned total football and had instead taken up total destruction. I would love to say that the Dutch of 2010 were remembered for playmaking and goal scoring, for Van Persie, for Robben, for Schneider, for Van Bronckhorst's dream goal. But that isn't how things played out. And who would be the final opponent for the total destruction Dutch team? Well, there's more irony here as well. During the years of 1973 through 78, some of his best years, Johan Cruyff played at Barcelona, before moving to some other clubs. Immediately after his retirement as a player in 1984, he would join Ajax as coach starting in 1985, the club where he was an on-field genius as Rinus Michels' total football developed. In his time as manager of Ajax, he would run a fluid system that was influenced by the earlier philosophies of total football. After that, he returned to Barcelona as manager and brought that same style to Catalonia. Through the mythical Dream Team years, Barcelona were replete with silverware. Cruyff would eventually leave in the mid-90s, but the total football-inspired style remained alive at Barcelona as a succession of Dutch managers further developed a passing-first system out of what Cruyff had installed. By 2010, Spanish tiki-taka, the modern descendant of total football, had been installed at the national team level. If you haven't already guessed or didn't already know, Spain would be the opponents in the final in Johannesburg. As with 1974, the final would be a battle of footballing ideologies. The passing and off-ball movement-focused Spanish tiki-taka versus a hard-nosed, old-world Dutch defense. As the game progressed, it was clear that the Spanish's tactics had the Netherlands outmatched. Opportunities came and went for both sides, but more so for the Spanish, who were snake-bitten in front of net all night under the lights, while Stekelenburg had the game of his life. The Dutch were never out of it, though, and it would only take one spark to put them in front. It was the sort of game that would finish 1-0. In the 62nd minute, Wesley Sneijder controlled the ball in his own half. Sneijder was arguably the best player in the world in the year 2010, and he'll have a compelling case for Ballon d'Or by the end of the year, an accolade which he will eventually miss out on. Angling himself and falling over, he sends it forward and finds Arjen Robben in empty space. There's nothing but green grass and the keeper ahead of him. He shoots. Out of all of these finals, all these matches where Dutch dreams gave way to those of others, this is the best chance for a winner in all of them. The most tangible moment where victory was in sight. Casillas, with an outstretched right foot, saves the ball, just barely. The Spanish chances keep coming and the game goes to extra time. The Dutch players get more and more tired and the defense becomes frantic. John Heitinga gets sent off with a second yellow card, and in the 116th minute the Dutch team simply can't turn back the pressure anymore. Andres Iniesta, one of the centerpieces of the modern evolution of the system that Cruyff himself had instilled at Barcelona, finds himself open at the back post. Via a failed clearance and a pass, it finally reaches him, and he takes his shot. And as the ball flies past Stekelenburg, the voice of the commentator still echoes today. Surely now, Spain have won the World Cup. The third World Cup final loss in 2010 lended the Dutch the dubious honor of having the most finals losses without a win of any nation. They haven't been back since, after losing on penalties to Argentina in both 2014 and 2022, and missing the tournament entirely in 2018. There isn't one lesson here, from these three losses, each for different reasons. The first while at the vanguard of change but not yet refined enough, the second without the services of their best player, and the third being bowled over by the newest pinnacle that had come to eliminate what had come before it. The Netherlands, if present trends do continue, will win a World Cup eventually, maybe soon if they get lucky, and ensure that their colors, the famous orange, are no longer linked to failures at the final hurdle. And when it is finally their day, it will redeem all of this. The legacy of these men won't be marked anymore by lost dreams of the one trophy they couldn't bring home, and will instead be decorated by their own merits, creativity, resilience, strength, and the imagination and audacity to invent, to change the world around them. Johan Cruyff died in 2016. He never got to see his country win the World Cup. But when they do, his name will certainly be among the first that those future Dutch players think of, on that day when the final whistle crowns them champion. One of the players that Cruyff coached at Barcelona, Pep Guardiola, would go on to become a manager himself, and would develop Cruyff's system further, using it to lead multiple club teams that each have a claim to be the greatest ever. His success and the subsequent popularization of Guardiola ball means that to some extent, the system that Cruyff developed now underpins virtually all of high-level tactics in world football today. Despite these three losses, the truth does remain that, as long as football is played, some team, somewhere, will owe something of their game to Johan Cruyff.